These are the best redesigns ever added to Minecraft. And hey, I heard a YouTube rumor that it's impossible to subscribe and like the video at the same time. So if you want to prove them wrong, then take a simultaneous strike at those two buttons down below. It's free and it helps out a ton. With the texture updates of 1.14, our Minecraft wooden items started to look a lot different. Not the least of which having to do with the fact that we now had more wooden variations to play around with. But also, if you look at the items instead of the blocks placed within the actual world, you can see some differences start to pop out if you study it right. And I think it's here where you can see that it's actually quite a good redesign. I mean, look at the original spruce door texture to what we now have. One looks like programmer art, and the other one looks like something you'd put in an actual game. And I particularly like the differences that we got to the handles seen on the crimson and warped stem signs. Now they have a crimson and warped stem. But I will say, with all those details that got added, it's weird that if you look at the item slot for the lapis lazuli that goes inside of the enchanting table, that actually became less detailed. I don't know. We can focus on the good redesigns at least for this one. Minecraft boats used to suck, and I don't think I'm gonna make anyone angry by saying that. Because really, when you go and look at how these used to be, they were practically impractical. And I'm not talking about the fact that you used to have to craft one of these using a wooden shovel on Bedrock Edition, although we thought that was a good idea. But rather, in the early days of Minecraft boats, these would just happen to break against anything. Seriously, try taking one of the old boats through a swamp biome, those lily pads turn into landmines. And thankfully in 1.12, Minecraft boats were massively changed. Now they no longer broke on impact, and they got a lot easier to control, which is great, but it's unfortunate this would come after the time of when Minecraft used to generate its worlds with such huge oceans. I mean, really, if you got an ocean seed back in old updates, you would just reset. Even if you had yourself a tree to craft a boat, it wasn't exactly a fun journey. One of the most recent texture changes that was met with applause happened with the bamboo logs. Since during the snapshot phase for Minecraft 1.20, we would not only get a use to turn our bamboo into actual wooden blocks, but we also got this initial texture, where it was yellow on the top despite being green everywhere else. And that made a lot of the community pretty mad, which is why Mojang changed it in the very next snapshot, 22W46A. But they also didn't fully get rid of this. If you wanted green, there was options with that, and if you wanted the yellow coloration, there was also that too. Which for builders is always the best option. If you're gonna ask me which texture I want to build with, the answer's all of them. We'll always take more for the palette. Back in the first versions of Minecraft, and granted, not the beta, but the actual released versions, if you were to punch a tree of any different type, regardless of what it was, you would always break down into oak planks. And it wasn't until later they would actually redesign it so that there were multiple different wood types and oak planks in the game. Look, baby steps are still steps. At least we're moving in the right direction. In the early days of Minecraft Creative, we did not have nearly as many nice features for our creative menu as we do today. For one, there was no categories. Everything was just in a miscellaneous list. And then if you wanted to find something, you're also out of luck. There was no search feature either. And while there is something of a nostalgic charm to looking at this set of blocks like this, we'd all be kidding ourselves if we didn't say that the new one's better. I mean, there's a reason why mods like Too Many Items came in to show what would have been possible with a creative menu, and thankfully Mojang seemed to follow suit with their own. And particularly, I like the ability to turn on the admin-only items and get things like the debug stick, the barrier, the command blocks, all without having to type in a command. That's helpful for me. Minecraft villages used to be rare, but a rare thing isn't always a good thing. It definitely isn't always pretty. And so there were some times when you would happen to spawn next to a village or find one out in the wild, and it would just not blend in with its surroundings. And as we got more biomes, that became painfully noticeable. So thankfully, in the Village and Pillage update, Mojang took this and made the villages actually change to redesign to their spawn location. So if a village spawns in a savanna biome where there's acacia planks, then of course it's going to be built out of acacia. And then having the villagers also match their clothes to the environment's a nice touch. I do miss some of the old coats that the villagers used to wear, but I also really like the swamp villager hat. Makes me wish that there was a proper swamp village in the game, but I digress. Did you know you used to be able to get wool in a desert? That wasn't because there was any sheep wandering across the desert sands, but really it was just because prior to 1.8, desert temples would spawn with wool blocks for their decorations, and it wasn't changed until later to redesign these to have colorful terracotta instead, which you do not have to look at a comparison for long to see that this was definitely a necessary change. I don't need my desert temple to be flammable, and considering these can already be partially buried anyway, yeah, I think it just makes sense. And Mojang did too, hence the redesign. When Prismarine was first added to the game, the texture was noticeably darker than what we have today. And because of how dark the original texture was, the way that it color changes over time, yeah, that was not subtle to say the least. Granted, we're looking at a sped up GIF here, but even then, when you compare this to where it actually ended up at, it's easy to say it's a lot better integrated nowadays. I mean, most people don't even notice that it changes from blue to green, hence why we've included it in our fact videos. Nowadays, thanks to hardcore Minecraft, the Totem of Undying texture is iconic. It kinda has to be when everyone's holding in their secondary slot, which makes me even more thankful that it isn't the totem texture that we originally had, since back in Snapshot 16W39A, the Totem of Undyne was originally supposed to be added to 1.11 looking like this, which more resembles a peeled banana than actually a villager. And honestly, I'd rather carry around a totem that looks like Sandiction in my hotbar, but I might have just wanted to do that anyways. Minecraft sponges used to be a laughingstock. I mean, they were one of the ugliest textures in the game, and to make matters worse, after they were originally added, they actually had their purpose stripped from them. When they were first added, sure, you could use them to drain water, but then, for years in between, they were completely pointless. Add a sponge that doesn't soak up water, and it just looks like ugly cheese. And it wouldn't be until Snapshot 14W25A that Jeb finally announced on Twitter that sponges would be changed to soak up water once again. But they'd soak up a lot more than they used to, too. And then also, following those changes, it would get a new texture in 1.14 along with the rest of them, which is quite the glow up, both in its purpose and in its function. In the older days of Minecraft, when you mined an ore, it would just drop itself, which means that the best that you could possibly hope from your iron or gold ores was a 1-to-1 ratio. But then, as of 1.17, along with the new textures, we also got a much better return on these, through the addition of a new item called raw ore. And now we didn't just have to save our Fortune 3 pickaxe for redstone, diamonds, and lapis, but instead, if we mined everything, we could get a whole bunch more copper, iron, and gold. And then if you were worried about the storage that you'd lose from not using Silk Touch, don't worry, craft it into a full material block, and now you're holding 9 in a slot instead of just 1. You would think when you're making the texture for a glass block, one of the main things you'd want to worry about is being able to see through it. But you also have to let the player know that it is there, otherwise it's an invisible barrier. So how do you get around that? Well, through the 2 different glass textures that the game has had, we can see very different interpretations. Now, the original one had way too many white specks floating out in the middle of the air that sure, it was clear that there was a block there, but it also wasn't very clear to see through. And so the one that we have today is actually a nice middle ground. And funnily enough, the idea for this really stemmed back from the original designs that we saw in the version 2.0 April Fool's Snapshot, where we both had stained glass and a more clear glass texture. So if anything good came from a joke, we can say that this is it. In the 1.21 update, we're going to be getting a lot more copper items to play around with. I'm most focused on the creative menu, simply for the reason that if you search up copper now, since there's now exactly 9 items of variation here that we're seeing, it all lines up really nice in the creative menu search. Yeah, I'd be lying if I said that wasn't a little satisfying to see. Alright, pop quiz. Which one of these is coal and which one is charcoal? Well, when it was first added in, it was nearly impossible to tell the difference, considering that charcoal had the same texture as coal, and it wasn't until a few updates later that charcoal would get its own texture like this. But really, they both burn for the same amount of time and they have the same use, so there wasn't much of a drawback for getting them confused. Although I guess it would have been confusing to try and stack both of these together in a chest. Did you know pigs could drop brown mushrooms? Sure enough, back in the Java Edition survival test, there was a time where these mobs only dropped brown mushrooms on death. But obviously, this was changed to a pork chop when that item got added in. Oh, it makes me wonder, if you eat a mushroom stew made out of pig shrooms, is that still vegetarian? I don't know. Of all the items in Minecraft, there's only one that has the word blocks in its name that isn't an actual block. And of course, that would be the music disc for the track, well, blocks. But that's also why it sticks out like a sore thumb when you type in the word block into the creative menu. Obviously, one of these is not like the others. In case you didn't know, leaves in Bedrock Edition turn white when you leave them in the snow. But if you play that version and you never noticed, that might not be your fault, since it's not an instant transition. And instead, it'll take some time in the tundra before it finally changes their tone. Alright, pop quiz. What mob is this? I'll give you a hint, it's not a silverfish. Actually, it's just an endermite. See, when the endermite was added in, it was just a purple version of the silverfish, before it eventually got this new smaller model that we see today. Minecraft has plenty of minor frustrations, and sometimes it's hard to notice them until they happen to you. Like in the past when you would type into bed, only for it to close the chat window once you wake up. And thankfully, that's been rectified for us going forward. Now, when you take away all the nostalgia, it's hard to argue that early versions of Minecraft didn't just look ugly. And a big part of that is that we didn't have things like smooth lighting to clean up our world. So if you wanted that back in the past, the best you had was a mod called Better Light by Mr. Messiahs. But it was because of that light by Mr. Messiah that Mojang was so impressed that they actually used the code and help from Mr. Messiah to eventually code the smooth lighting into the game itself. And as a thank you, Mojang would also give Mr. Messiah a unique cape, which in case it didn't feel cool enough for already getting a thank you from Mojang, an exclusive cape really bumps that up. When hoppers were first added into the game, they initially only had a work in progress texture, but maybe not in the way you're thinking. Because as you can see, this only showed up when you had the hopper inside of your inventory. But even with that said, it is still pretty funny to walk around with a WIP just hanging around in your hand. I must be a bad trainer, because no matter how many times I try to tame wolves, I can never get them to sit still. Though the reason for that might just be because when you summon a wolf on top of a slime block and then tame it, you can't actually get it to sit sit down, since the way that the slime block works, it's a little bit less than a full block size. And that confuses the wolf's hitbox so that it sits down and then stands right back up. I can't say I blame them, I also don't want to sit down in Nickelodeon GAC. This block only exists in Pocket Edition, or at least it used to, because nowadays this block looks a whole lot different, and it's the stone cutter they're all used to. But sure enough, when it was first added into Pocket Edition, it did used to be a full block in size, looking a lot closer to a furnace than anything that we're used to today. And while the old texture was boring, it looks a lot easier to stand on, so it might have been nice to have a safer option. As you'll see, back in the beta snapshots for Bedrock, there was a glitch that let frogs eat any goats that got nearby. So even if they can't eat fireflies, at least the goats weren't poisonous. This was promptly patched out, since it was just some leftover prototype code. When you think of mobs, you're probably picturing something like this, or this, but probably not this. Though when they were first added in back in the Java Edition survival test, they were just that. And initially, signs would only spawn by pressing the B key, at which point it would say the text, "This is a test of the sign, each line can be 15 characters. When Mojang makes a change, they aren't always decisive, and sometimes that means a feature gets added in and then removed in a later update. But this seems particularly indecisive, because back in the InfDev stages of Minecraft, 4 updates in a row saw leaves change to not decay, decay, not decay, and then decay once again, which is quite the identity crisis, but luckily it's been solved. If you've been raiding bastions in the Nether, then you know that it takes plenty of luck to find the pig step disc. But apparently, that's not the only rare pig step in the game, since as a snapshot 20W22A, piglins will occasionally dance after hoglin hunting. So if you're part of that lucky few who gets to see it, this will definitely establish you some dominance. When you're exploring in Minecraft, we all know to pack a bunch of food, yet somehow I still never seem to bring enough. And would you believe it, that was even worse in the beta versions of Minecraft, since back then only the cookies would stack, and even then you could only have up to 8 of them in a given stack. And thankfully nowadays we've got much better pockets for our pork. Nowadays shields are a necessity for PvP, but it turns out there's something even better, or at least there will be. See, in the separate combat test snapshots, Mojang currently has a change that will allow shields with banners to have more absorption, giving 10 instead of 5. And while this will likely be replaced with actual shield variants in the final run, for right now, a little banner goes a long way. See, well before rabbits got added in 1.8, you'd also see these much smaller dwarf rabbits that were jumping around the Twilight Forest. Aside from also being rabbits, they look very different in design for what we got in today. And honestly, I'm surprised the mod is a more simple model than what we got in the game. But hey, they both have one that looks like an evil rabbit, just these ones are always passive. No Monty Python reference here. Before tall grass made it into Minecraft, we had something called wild grass, which was a mod that added on an extra layer of grass on top of our regular grass to create a kind of pseudo tall grass. Though when we eventually did get tall grass into Minecraft, it was still significantly taller than the wild grass mod, which I guess is why it's not called tall wild grass, huh? When the drowned was first added to Minecraft, it looked a lot different, since the original concept for the drowned mob had it looking like a half skeleton, half zombie mix, which is not only a lot creepier, but it also blends in pretty well with the dirt that you see at the bottom of the riverbed. Though I suppose it makes sense why it was changed, because this feels a little too gory for Minecraft. But it worked for the zombie pigmen, so who's to say? This might look like a hopper, but it's actually a chute, which is just one of the many different blocks in Buildcraft that went on to inspire the way that we move our items in Minecraft. But what's even more interesting about the Buildcraft chute is that it actually was called the hopper, but changed the name when Minecraft used it in the vanilla release. I guess that would get pretty confusing, but it also makes the inspiration pretty clear to see. If we were to cast a fishing rod and then zoom in, you notice that in Java, the fishing bobber is a 2D texture, but in Bedrock it's a 3D modeled cube. And why the difference, I'm not exactly sure. It seems like more effort to do the 3D cube anyway, but it does fit Minecraft a little better, so I think it's fair. If you were to get a glass pane inside of your inventory in both versions, then you'll notice that in Bedrock they have a 3D icon, while in Java the glass panes use a 2D sprite, which could be a problem if you were to dye your glass pane, since a light gray stained glass pane is a lot more obvious in Bedrock than it's ever been in Java. The next time you're on fire, you might want to look for a candle, because while it won't help, in Bedrock Edition it is possible to light a candle while your body's on fire. And the same also goes for campfires as well, which doesn't solve your problem, but it might kill 2 birds with 1 stone. If we were to open up the book and quill in Bedrock, you'll notice that we can see 2 pages at once, while in Java, we're only seeing 1 at a time, which is a little more straightforward, but on Bedrock it actually feels like a book. And if only it was easier to type on console. When you see a snowball, the last thing you're thinking of is fire. Though if we check a snowball through a flame, the projectile will actually ignite, and in Bedrock, it can even cause fire damage to mobs, making that snow golem a proper flamethrower. Speed bridging is a big deal for the PvP community, and while it's a big skill to place blocks like this on Java, on Bedrock it's possible to place blocks without sneaking to the edge, and that'll even allow us to speed bridge on a horse for some reason. Redstone and water don't mix, or at least that's what we think on Java, but if you place any of these redstone components in a lake on Bedrock Edition, it'll work just as they do on the surface. If we were to feed our mobs these different items on Bedrock, you'll notice that each different food has a different particle effect as a result. While on Java, it doesn't matter what you're feeding them, you're not going to see any difference. Early on into the development of the Warden, it was revealed by King B-Dogs on Twitter that it actually would burn up when it got into the sunlight, which honestly makes sense. It's a creature from the deep dark. I can imagine it not liking the sunlight that much. But I guess they decided against this when they made it a blind mob. I mean, you can't exactly hear light, at least not noticeably. So that, along with all these old Warden designs, got pushed to the wayside. In Java, a spider jockey looks like this, but on Bedrock Edition, we have a whole bunch of other jockeys to choose from. In fact, there's up to 12 different variants in this version alone, which is a lot more terrifying. Playing Minecraft at max render distance is a big flex, but that's a bit different between the two versions, since Java has a default max of 32 chunks, whereas Bedrock lets us play up to 96. In Bedrock, it's possible to mine a furnace or an enchantment table without using a pickaxe, and the item will still drop, which is a bit confusing considering that they're made out of blocks that don't drop without a pickaxe anyway in either version. But I'm not complaining if it means I get to save the durability of my diamond pickaxe. The bad omen effect is not something I'd recommend getting often, but when you do, pay attention to how it happens, because while it functions like any other effect in Java, in Bedrock it'll have an animation similar to the Totem of Undying. When you work with redstone, you're sure to notice that pistons can't push chests, or hoppers or furnaces for that matter, though for those on Bedrock, it's as simple as the flick of a switch, and frankly, that's what I'm jealous of. Needing Dragon Breath for tipped arrows can quickly get expensive, so as a simpler solution, Bedrock lets us make a whole stack of them from a potion cauldron like so. And hey, maybe Java would too, if there were potion cauldrons in the version. Armor stands are great for showing off, well, your armor, but what if you want to show off your items? Well, in Bedrock, that's as easy as putting it in the stand's hand, and unfortunately, Java doesn't do that by default. In both Java and Bedrock, parrots are able to dance, but in Bedrock only, if you get a parrot on top of your shoulder, it's still able to have a dance party up there, which is a lot more fun, and I'm kind of jealous that we don't have this on Java. Now, back in 2012, we did have ice and we did have boats, but we wouldn't have ice highways until 1.9, and the reason was because back in 2012, the boat would move as slow on ice as it did on land, so all you'd get from building yourself an ice highway was a waste of time to use an even greater waste of time on. Minecraft jukeboxes have always been a redstone item, but they've never always played well with redstone, and up until recently it was completely impossible to use things like dispensers to put music discs in and hoppers to take music disc out. But as of 1.19.4, finally this implementation's added to our jukeboxes, letting us loop the music over and over again, or until you get copyright striked. Yeah, sorry about that one. Minecraft's clouds don't get a lot of love, and by this point many of us have turned them off in the settings, but part of that is because these exist so low within the world, and thankfully along with the new height to our worlds, these now can float at a Y level of 192 instead of 128 like before. One of the big changes for Minecraft going forward is parity between how Java and Bedrock generate. So as the two versions get closer and closer, our enchantment tables are doing the same. And now, enchantment tables in the Java version give off a light level of 7, just enough to light up the 15 bookshelves nearby. As it is, it's pretty tough to get a beacon to work in the nether, since you've got to clear out all of the nether rack above it. But in the past, it was even worse, since back then, the beacon beam wouldn't even go through the bedrock. So to even get it to work, you'd have to remove the unbreakable block from up top. And thankfully that was corrected in 1.8.2, so you don't have to rely on a glitch to make this happen. Before archaeology got added in 1.20, it had been teased for 3 years prior to its initial release. And it looks like one of the things that Mojang couldn't decide on was how this brush was supposed to look, since it's had 3 different looks since it was initially released. This one with both a copper and an oxidized handle, this one that looked more like a paintbrush, and finally, the design that we've seen today. And honestly, I'm glad that we don't have to worry about another thing oxidizing for our copper. I don't exactly want to get struck by lightning while I'm holding one of these things. Using this command, we're able to summon in a special wolf called Mars, which is a mob so rare, it only exists in the April Fool's version of the 1 block at a time update. But much like the special name tag for the rabbit variant named Toast, this gives you a different colored variant on the standard wolf skin. This texture tweak was small, but it made a big difference, because when Mojang first added in observers, their arrows used to point the other direction, which is definitely confusing to see when you look back at it nowadays, but it must have been confusing at the time, since shortly after they would flip around the arrow texture so that it now matches what it is today. During the development stages of Minecraft, the axe looked a little different, since back in Minecraft in dev, the axe's texture was double-sided like a battle axe, which seems pretty impractical when you're just trying to cut down a tree that's right in front of you, which is probably why the texture was changed just a few days later, and then changed again so that it faced the other way that we're now familiar with. Minecraft 1.14 wasn't just the texture update, but it was also apparently the abbreviation update, since what used to be called rose red, dandelion yellow, and cactus green dye were just changed to red, yellow, and green dye for consistency discrepancy with the other dye colors. Which I guess makes sense. If you have multiple different ways to get the other dyes, you can't exactly name it after one thing. Not to mention they're not even called roses anymore, they're called poppies, so I can see why the change was made. This official Minecraft skin was lost to time, but back when Mojang first put out the original Minecraft trailer, there did exist this different variant of Steve that never got used, where instead of the blue shirt and jeans that we're used to, he was wearing a gray shirt and mossy cobblestone pants, which is definitely a look. But with all the new Minecraft skins that they added into the launcher, I'm still amazed this one's never seen the light of day. Although I guess it did show up in a trailer that was seen by over 100 million people, so it's not exactly underground. In the future, we'll be able to stack potions like this, or at least that's the idea behind this combat test snapshot. Since to completely rework how PvP's done in Minecraft, Mojang's working on the idea that we'd be able to stack up the same potion to a stack of 16, which is a big change for inventory management considering that holding 16 potions currently looks like this. Not exactly easy to pack. During development, the Evoker used to look pretty different, and we could see that from when Mojang did this Meet the Evoker article. The mob originally had a hat like so, but even though they removed this before release, it's interesting to note that it resembles the one that you see on the Illusioner mob. Though the Illusioner wasn't added officially either, so maybe Mojang just doesn't like hats. Back in Java Edition Classic, when you broke a wood log, it would drop the planks instead of the actual block, which seems more like mine than craft to me. The Phantom used to look like a nether mob, but that's the problem. It was never meant to be. So because of this, Mojang switched its red texture to the darker purple colors that we see today. In the past, we've sung the praises of using a boat to negate any fall damage that you might take in the nether, but there's a reason we didn't tell you to do this back in 2012. For one, the channel didn't exist, but also, back then if you were in a boat, you would still take all of the fall damage that you take from a fall. And it wasn't until 1.7.2 that this finally got fixed, and our boat MLGs started to work out a bit better. Did you know that enchanted golden apples used to be a bad thing? Yeah, oddly enough, high levels of regeneration could actually lower or remove your invincibility frames entirely, which caused this bug to make you more susceptible to damage while you had an enchanted golden apple. And understandably so, this got fixed in 1.6.1, because that completely breaks this really powerful item. Before we got the update Aquatic in 1.13, the ocean biome looked extremely dark, and in fact, even if you placed glowstone down there, that would only light up about 5 blocks around it. But nowadays, we've got things like sea lanterns and coral reefs to finally light up the abyss, which is nice, but that update also added in the drowned mobs, so you get what you get, I guess. Next, we've got number 69, which is the wolf. When they were first shown off, they were a lot darker, and they only lasted around for a few days before they got in the new textures. Nowadays, we're all familiar with the concept of an MLG water bucket save, but back in the day, it wasn't as popular, and for good reason. See, in the past, you'd need a puddle that was 2 blocks deep to stop any kind of fall damage, and it wasn't until after 1.4.4 that we could finally do this with 1 bucket. Back in the day, the end dimension used to look like a mess, and I'm not talking about the old endstone texture, but rather the obsidian pillars that would spawn there were scattered and unorganized back in the day. And really, it's hard to appreciate this one until you look at a side-by-side, because now with the ring of pillars, it looks so much better. And I'm sure that Sandiction's build wouldn't have looked nearly as good if this didn't get fixed. When you're building, sometimes it can be frustrating when blocks don't behave how you'd expect, which is why it's nice that recent versions have glass panes and iron bars lining up properly with the walls. Before, if you looked at something like this, it's just not what you would want for the structure. So a subtle change, but a treat to the eyes nonetheless. It's a well-established rule. You can't sleep when monsters are nearby. But while that's not changing anytime soon, Mojang has added one small bit to lighten the load. You see, even though you can advance to morning when a zombie is next door, you're still able to set your spawn point the same, which is nice because if I'm stuck here, I'd at least want a safety net to keep on hand. To Mojang's credit, the 1.17 update seems to clean up a chunk of texture inconsistencies, and I'm sure you can thank the Vanilla Tweaks team for bringing some of those to the forefront. And among them, one that I'm sure that builders will be happy to see is that signs now match the planks texture from 1.14. Before now, they still had the old plank texture, even though they were added in the same update as the so-called texture update. But hey, better late than never. With the changes in the Caves and Cliffs update, Minecraft's build height has needed to expand. And while that means that we can now place blocks much higher than we used to, one feature actually got even taller. Now, beacon beams are visible up to 1,343 blocks away from the source, as opposed to the 256 of the past. Shulker boxes are a crucial item to get your hands on, but while they're great for storage, they're not the best for item security. For an example, if you took all of your best valuables and enchanted tools into this one box, then if you dropped it into lava or something, all of it would get destroyed, even if it was netherite. But now we might have a chance to save some. In 1.17, a shulker box will pop when destroyed, allowing some of the items to escape the danger. Lava is not the best for visibility, but when you're in spectator mode, it's just frustrating to be blinded. Well, thankfully with 1.17's slew of changes, that restriction also got lifted. So, going forward, be prepared to properly spectate the Nether Fortress battle. Nothing's gonna hold you back. If you've ever killed a bunch of mobs at an XP grinder, then you're well and aware that these orbs could cause a ton of lag. So thankfully, the Carpet Mod team had a feature that would allow experience orbs to combine into larger entities so that you didn't have as many on screen. And while that was a great solution, it was only third party. That is, until now, where in recent versions, the orbs will actually merge to cut down on entity count. And it's a nice touch for sure. When you're playing on a multiplayer server, it can be a big headache when someone goes AFK, because if they aren't sleeping, you aren't sleeping. And now the phantoms are going to be a problem for everyone. So luckily, the community's prayers were answered in this one, allowing for the game rule, players sleeping percentage. With this, you can just set how many players you need to sleep till morning. And while it's 100% by default, I imagine most of us will bump that down significantly. Baby zombies are annoying, but they used to be so much worse. Back in 2012, they would just chase you around forever, since no matter if it was day or night, they wouldn't burn in the sunlight. And in fact, that wouldn't be added in until 1.13, which was a lot of updates of having to deal with these ankle biters. And now thankfully they take after their parents and say their goodbyes when it's daytime. I think we all can agree that more accessibility options are always a good thing, which is why it's a real treat to see that the flashing lights from a lightning storm can now be toggled off like so. And if it lets me build a machine like this without the headache that comes with, that's definitely a plus. Using lapis lazuli to enchant seems expensive, but it used to be so much worse, since back in the day it would require 50 levels for a max level enchant. And folks, that's not just 50 levels to qualify, that's 50 levels for one enchantment. And even though that got bumped down to 30 levels in 1.3.1, it was eventually entirely reworked in 1.8 to where you just need 3 levels after you hit the 30 level enchant barrier. We now have the updated locate commands. So with these, you can search for something even more specific. So if I want to find like a biome that has, let's say like a plains village, I can look for that. While the commands got fixed, there also are a couple of bug fixes. One of the first bug fixes is that there used to be a problem in the old screenshots here where if a door was flipped, it wasn't consistent with the texture on its side. So if you'd flip it, this part should have stayed along one side, but now it does.
Oh, thank God. I'm really relieved that's been taken care of.
One of my favorite bug fixes that they did is that the Striders, when they were spawned with no AI, they would still get cold. But now if you spawn a Strider with no AI, it stays warm and happy.
Hey, dude. What a nice guy.
The brewing stand's arms now connect to the base.
Yes!
Have the end portal frame now blends in better next to endstone. Although I don't know why they fixed that, because end portal frames don't generate naturally on top of endstone.
You would never have them near each other, but okay.
And the same happens for mycelium and dirt, which is a little bit more of a common occurrence. You're gonna have to get a real close-up look for this one, because now the smoker's bottom pixel originally wasn't aligned. So you would see it like this, as you can see in the item frame. It used to have off to the side, whereas the other ones were aligned to the center.
So this is where our taxes are going.
Yeah. This is where our taxes are going?
Model this for us.
Absolutely.
What you can see is that the brown bar on the back of leather-dyed helmets extends down to the bottom.
Look at this business in the front, party in the back.
You can keep that hat if you want to.
Yes! Yes! Yes!
So this one actually did bother me a little bit, so I'm glad that they fixed it. The shields now align with the middle of the item frame, whereas in the past they aligned off center.
Oh, that is infuriating.
Now if you rotate it, it actually rotates in the center. Something big actually happened here with leaves. They're now waterloggable.
Oh, what?
And if you think that's cool, there's a little bit of a trick. If I place 2 leaves, I place the first one with a water bucket and the second one with a bucket of tropical fish, give it some time to sink up to the top, and then break this, I now have a tiny fish aquarium.
Awesome, that's all I ever wanted.
If you craft a minecart with a block, it's now shapeless. Normally you'd put it one on top of the other, and that's how it was supposed to be, but now you can move the chest to one corner, the minecart to wherever else you want, and it'll still work.
Oh, okay. I guess that makes sense.
There used to be a thing with the Warden when it was in development where the Sonic Blast animation, where it does that like big roar, it would dab.
Oh my God.
When the Phantom was first shown off in the mob vote, it originally had a mouth in the concept art.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. They removed it because, quote, it looked too much like a Muppet.
I don't see that at all. That's ridiculous.
The Mushroom had it added where it's now the 4th mob that is affected by a lightning strike. This is gonna hurt me more than it hurts him.
No!
Actually, maybe it won't. If you kill a husk and it drops a potato, and you use a fire aspect sword, it'll drop a baked potato. Back in the day when they were first added in, the zombie villager actually wore the same clothing as the original zombie. The Strider was first added in, it used to look like a pill bug.
That's disgusting. I hate it. Much more handsome. Look at this guy.
Back in the day, playing Minecraft could be pretty difficult. And not because of anything with the game's difficulty, rather it was the last half of the game's name, craft. There were too many blocks and items and too many crafting recipes to remember. So a lot of us turned to things like too many items as a way to learn what we're crafting. crafting. And following suit, Mojang eventually added in the recipe book into our actual crafting UI, which not only let us look up a crafting recipe, but also let us quick craft, which was good news for all of us. And the Augscast, it seemed like they had trouble remembering too. Long before pistons were ever added into vanilla Minecraft, there did exist a mod back in the day called, quite simply, the Piston mod. I'll give you one guess what it did. And though they beat Mojang to the punch, these pistons look quite a bit differently to what we're used to. They were completely white in color, and if you activated them, they could launch both blocks and players. And it was because Mojang loved that piston mod so much that they would actually use a lot of the code for the mod to make their own pistons. And with that, folks, YouTube thinks that you might like this video, so see if they're right and have a good one, alright?